Story 1. My stepfather's odd rule was that any compact disc I bought he had to listen to before I could take it into my room. Cassette tapes were fine, he did not check those. Oddly, he never vetoed any of the compact discs. I bought random compact discs at thrift stores and flea markets. Some were pretty strange, such as a disc with 13 tracks of satanic hymns and a box set of polka music. He would listen to every track, even check for hidden tracks and note them on a sticker inside the compact disc case, then invariably give it to me and say either that it was a good album or that my music was awful. I would then put it in my room. As an adult, I realized I probably could have just not told him I got new music. He did not search my room, and he laughed off most things that were not directly harming someone, so he probably would have thought it was funny. I never questioned the rule, nor why so many Beatles albums ended up in my collection. He was a huge Beatles fan. If he found an album on compact disc he did not have, he bought 2 copies, one for himself and one for me. He did not hand them to me. He would quietly go into my room and leave them beside the compact disc player. He did the same with some other artists, but the Beatles were his favorites. He also had a rule that if I was upset, I was not allowed to be alone. He would not bother me, but I had to stay in the same room as him, and if I took too long in the bathroom, he would knock. That was because I was, and still am, mentally ill, and he did not want me to harm myself. It was not nonsense. People tend to side-eye it until they understand why he did it. He has since passed away. He was a good stepfather. I wish every child had one like him. Story 2. You cannot swear until you have a driver's license. A knee-jerk reaction to how come you can say that word but I cannot. It made enough sense to me. Story 3. I was grounded 1 week for every minute I was late. It would not have been an issue, but my dad set all the clocks at different times, 10 to 20 minutes apart, and he decided which clock was correct after I got home. I had to get in the habit of coming home 30 minutes early every day or risk months of grounding. After I started driving, a new rule was that I could not enter the house between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. If I got home at 11:01 p.m., I had to sleep in my car until morning. Story 4. My parents told me that turning on the car's interior light while driving was illegal. I believed them for years until I realized it was only annoying, not against the law. Story 5. You can't swim unless it's 77 degrees Fahrenheit. That's swimming weather. Anything else is too cold for the pool. It took me a long time to realize there wasn't any particular wisdom behind that rule. It was just an arbitrary number my parents picked to draw a yes or no line. Story 6. Making a bulldog face was not allowed because they said it would get stuck that way forever. The reality is my parents did not know how to help us children regulate our emotions, so negative emotions were not allowed. Story 7. My stepdad had many strange rules. I was only allowed to listen to the top 40 and could not listen to the classical music I preferred. I was never allowed to let my hair fall in front of my eyes. I could not wear pajamas during the daytime. I could not laugh at something if no one else knew why I was laughing. He called it narcissistic to say I was proud of myself. If he called me, I could not reply with yes. I had to say yes, Dad. I no longer speak to him or to my mother. Story 8. Children kept their footwear in the garage, even in winter in the Northeast. Parents kept their shoes and boots in the house. Story 9. I was never allowed to wear tights or leggings to bed because they would fall off and strangle you to death in the middle of the night. Story 10. When we bought a new car, we told the children that food and drink were not allowed in the car. Our 6-year-old was genuinely puzzled as to why the manufacturers would build cup holders into a car you could not drink in. Story 11. Mom told me that if I looked at dirty pictures of women, my eyes would dry out. That's why perverts are always blinking, she said. Story 12. When anyone is visiting, you are effectively under house arrest. You cannot leave for any reason whatsoever, and you will be judged and scolded for even daring to ask. Story 13. You have to turn your socks right side out before they are washed, or they will not get clean. Now that I have kids, I get it. Story 14. It was dangerous to open the cellar door. When I got a little older, I was curious and could not resist. I opened the door and saw things I had never seen before. Grass, trees, the sun, and the sky. Story 15. My dad's religion had one rule only: no Christmas lights on the house. I'm pretty sure I always knew it was nonsense, but as an adult nearing 40, I may be in the same religion. Story 16. They would not buy desks for our bedrooms. I bought my own when I was 12 and assembled it. It was a workaround for that rule. Story 17. I was not allowed to put an air freshener in the car my brother and I shared because my mom, who never even went in the car after we got our driver's licenses, did not like them. I had a small bottle of lotion in the car once and she saw it in the garage and took it out because she thought it was an air freshener. When I went to college and my brother took over the car and started smoking marijuana in it constantly, he could have all the air fresheners he wanted. But when I was completely sober, I was not allowed. It still pisses me off sometimes. I laugh out loud. Story 18. No touching, mommy, while she's eating. I was a very clingy child. Story 19. Because they believed the Bible allowed parents to discipline their children, they felt permitted to slap me whenever they were triggered by anything, a facial expression, a wrong tone of voice, or my being upset and not speaking calmly. If I came to them for help, they were more likely to slap me than to help. My father also said, the parent is always right. So if I disagreed with him, I would be slapped. Unfortunately, my father was often wrong. Story 20. No singing at the dinner table. We were 3 little girls. How much singing could there possibly have been? Story 21. I was not allowed to buy anything from the ice cream van because they were all drug dealers. I was not allowed to watch several shows, including The Simpsons, Billy and Mandy, Ed and Eddie, Ren and Stimpy, and others. No movies rated higher than PG-13 unless mom liked them. We had edited versions of some movies. No sleepovers on Saturday nights. No television, video games, or trampoline use on Sunday. There was no homework, biking, or roller skating on Sunday. No all-black outfits or black jackets. No books at the dinner table. Story 22. If we heard the ice cream van playing its chimes, it meant it was already sold out. Story 23. They did not make it up, but insisted on waiting after eating before swimming to avoid getting cramps and drowning. Story 24. It had to be 10 degrees Celsius for at least 5 days in a row before we could take our bikes out in spring. Story 25. Not allowed to watch Courage the Cowardly Dog, Billy and Mandy, or Yu-Gi-Oh! Story 26. No questions of a sexual nature. It was not an official rule, but I would be yelled at or accused of being too fast. My sex talk was to not make a name for myself. At the time, I had no idea what that meant. I remember asking if I had 2 holes or 3. My mother gave me a horrified look and told me I did not know, then said not to tell anybody. Of course, I did not know because she would not tell me. Story 27. My mom and stepdad had a rule that we had to sit in our assigned spots at the dining table and were not allowed to talk. The television was always on behind my sister and me, but if we turned to look at it or tried to watch anything in a reflection, we got into huge trouble. I was punished most often. I had to keep a mild, pleasant expression at all times, not look angry or upset, and not breathe louder than usual or I would receive a severe telling off. The most soul-crushing rule was that my sister was always considered right in any argument, and if she asked to borrow something of mine, I had to give it to her. It was not explicitly stated, but I worked it out quickly. It was not a happy childhood. Story 28. Always be honest. Never tell the truth if a family member might be offended by it. Story 29. They told me that if I swallowed watermelon seeds, I would grow a watermelon in my stomach. They would point to pregnant women and say they must have eaten a seed. They also said that if I swallowed gum, it would never digest and would sit in my stomach for the rest of my life until I swallowed so much that I would need surgery to remove it to make room to eat. Story 30. My mom told me the trees in the front yard were worth $50,000, so I would not climb them. It never made sense. We had no money, yet we had expensive trees. Still, I obliged. Story 31. People told me I could be too old for certain toys or books. I remember having to give away all my Ninja Turtles and, eventually, my Lego sets. Goosebumps books were not allowed after I was about 10. Now I am 39, and I buy my own Lego sets. Take that, you fascist parental figures. Story 32. Do not pick a posy past 9 o'clock, lest the midnight moth come to harvest your tongue. Story 33. My mom had a bunch of rules surrounding chores and homework. Most of what it taught me was how to be a better liar. Story 34. Riding a bicycle in flip-flops is illegal, and the police can confiscate it if they see you. Story 35. You couldn't eat non-breakfast foods before 11. Joke's on you. I simply didn't eat until then. Story 36. You cannot wear your newly purchased clothes until a special occasion. Story 37. If one of you messes up, you all mess up. As the youngest, I suffered many punishments before I was old enough to make my own mistakes. Group punishments were awful. Story 38. My mom's rule is that she owns me and can make me do whatever she wants. I do not have a say and am not allowed to have opinions. Story 39. You cannot turn on the interior light in a car while driving. Someone told me it was illegal. I believed that until I was 18 and passed my driving test. Story 40. My father chose the radio stations on all radios, including the one in my room and later in my car. He hated modern music and refused to have it played in his house. Story 41. My mother thought animals in general were disgusting. I was not allowed to pick up my outdoor cat. A pat on the head was enough, and I would get in trouble for picking up the cat. The cat lived 9 more years, and over that time my mother grew fond of the cat. Now the cat is allowed to sit in my lap on the couch and sleep in my room. Story 42. Not a strict rule, but Mom convinced me that the car's engine could not start until everyone's seatbelts were buckled. Story 43. They said they needed to check our Halloween candy for needles and razor blades. Those assholes were just taking the good stuff. Story 44. You know, it's not something my parents made up, but I once saw a television show with a mother who had a rule that her kids had to replace the words poop or shit with the name of a woman the mother hated. God, that is fucking hilarious writing. Story 45. My mother told us that your tongue would turn black if you lied. If I were lying and she asked me to stick my tongue out, I would, of course, refuse. This worked for longer than I would like to admit. Story 46. My parents used the threat that if I asked why again, I would be grounded. It lasted until they realized I had stopped asking who, what, where, why, and how everywhere. Took them about 4 years. I realized it was nonsense when I grew up because the things I asked about were simple to explain. Do the dishes. Why? Because if you do not, we will not have anything to eat on, and that includes you. Why? Because we are cooking dinner soon. I am not hungry. We are hungry, and it is the polite thing to do. Oh, can someone else do the dishes? No. We have to cook, and your brother needs to take a shower. Okay, I will do the dishes. Eventually, I would have understood without ever associating asking questions with punishment. Story 47. All the viruses on the shared computer were my fault because I looked at manga websites. Story 48. We had an arbitrary date when we could start going barefoot outside. I do not remember. Could be 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The actual temperature did not matter. It was so frustrating. Story 49. We weren't allowed to use the oven while the air conditioning was on. I assumed it was a law of science, something about heat canceling out cold, because my dad was so emphatic about it. It wasn't until I moved out and had my first apartment that I learned the truth. It had nothing to do with physics. It had everything to do with the electric bill. I love my dad. His frugality helped me graduate from college debt-free. Story 50. You cannot wear shorts until it is 60 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Eat your bread crusts and your hair will be curly. Story 51. You must finish all the food on your plate. You do not get to decide what is served or how much. There will be a lot. Story 52. You were not allowed to wear socks to bed. My dad was very easygoing, the kindest man you will ever know, but he had a few inexplicable hang-ups. One of them was that you had to have bare feet in bed. He would check for socks if he was suspicious. We never asked why. He just went off on this. To this day, I never do it. Another was what he called pushing. Pushing is when you cannot get food from your plate onto your fork, so you push it up onto the tines. Under no circumstances could you push it with your fingers. It was better to die. At various times in my childhood you were allowed to push with bread, though there usually was none because we were not a bread family. Tip up your plate so the remnants would fall onto the fork, or use your knife, though there usually was no knife. There may have been other options I do not remember. It was better to throw that last bit away than touch it with your fingers for a moment. I have no idea why. My parents were so good-natured and it was really hard to make them mad. But Christ, the fork pushing I do not understand. Story 53. Do not have the interior lights on while driving, even to look for an item. Story 54. Do not turn on the interior light in a car, or you will be pulled over. Story 55. We have food at home. We only had restaurant food, either Chinese food or Kentucky Fried Chicken, on rare occasions, usually on Fridays. We were also not allowed to have sugary cereals or a lot of candy. I think that might be why I have a hard time controlling my sugar intake these days. Story 56. Not quite childhood, but my dad insisted that driving barefoot was illegal. Story 57. Choosing where I wanted to live after completing year 10 was nonsense, so I did it myself. It was the best decision I ever made, but then I met my partner, and that was even better. Story 58. You had to wait a full hour before swimming after eating anything, whether it was a peanut or a roast beef dinner. If you broke that rule, you would get cramps, sink like a stone, and make your mother cry. Story 59. If you sing at the table or whistle in bed, the devil will get you before you are dead. Story 60. I was never allowed to have large water guns. I had to make do with a piddly little water pistol. As a child, I thought this was because my mother and grandfather both opposed role-playing violence, but I learned in my 20s that it was because my grandfather did not want me to have a bigger water gun than he had. My grandfather had the hose. He was already winning the water gun war. Story 61. You're not always going to get equal gifts. I didn't and thought that was my lot in life. Story 62. Do not go in the water for 2 hours after eating, or you may die. I am from Sicily. The sea is warm. Story 63. My parents told me that adults are always right and that I should never argue with them. When I grew up, I realized that dumb kids become dumb adults. Story 64. Toys were not allowed to be left out. If I was playing with a toy and went to the bathroom, I would come back and find it confiscated for 3 months. Story 65. My dad tried to ban Winx Club because of the exposed midriffs, but the low-quality anime with ridiculous jiggle physics he liked to watch was considered totally cool. Story 66. I had no privacy. The most infuriating thing my mom did was knock on my door twice, open it, and walk in. She never waited for me to give her permission. I had been undressed a few times, and she did not care because we were both women. I realized it was strange shortly before I turned 18. When I confronted her, she reacted angrily, insisting I had nothing to hide. I did not, but that was not the point. Story 67. The internet router and modem were turned off every night to save on the electricity bill. After I finished high school, we installed a Ring doorbell, and now the internet stays on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week because the camera might miss something at the door. Story 68. My dad didn't want me to go out into the night air with my hair wet. I sarcastically started calling it the killer night air. Story 69. When I was a kid in the 1980s and 1990s, my parents told me I was allergic to cigarette smoke and that I should not be near people who were smoking because I might have a reaction. Years later, I found out my mother simply hated the smell of cigarette smoke and told the whole family I was allergic so they would not smoke in her house. Story 70. No soda until afternoon. I broke that rule as soon as I went to college. Story 71. It is illegal to turn on the interior lights in the car while driving. Story 72. It is not illegal to turn on the small rear interior light while driving. My mother insisted they would have her hauled off to prison if she turned it on. Story 73. The Kids Police. It turns out I would not have been arrested if I had stayed up past my bedtime. Story 74. They said that if I swallowed a watermelon seed, a watermelon would grow in my stomach. I was terrified. Story 75. I'm 65 years old and I still have to wear shoes while driving. It's just a habit now. My mother said it was illegal to drive without shoes. Story 76. If we turn on the light in the car, we will crash. We cannot have a cat because it would kill the tooth fairy. We need to place a little present for Father Christmas before you go to bed. Story 77. My wife used to tell our children not to bite their fingernails, or they would get worms. Story 78. I don't know, but I have yet to laugh on the other side of my face. Story 79. You cannot eat bananas after dinner. It will give you nightmares. My mother simply did not want to feed me. She wanted me to go to bed. Story 80. No dessert until you finish your vegetables. Basically, childhood trauma disguised as nutrition. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.